Toronto Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the chance to participate in the debate, and I want to congratulate my colleague for King's Hants for introducing this motion, and say that I've been listening with great interest to the discussion and to the debate, and I'll have some comments to make about the speech that I've just heard from the member from Burnaby, New Westminster, but I want to be indicating my strong support for a simple proposition, which I don't believe is because I'm the captive of some strange ideology that has been ascribed to members of this party. I can only tell you that my support for the resolution comes from an intensely practical sense that right now we're facing a challenge as a country, Mr. Speaker, because our greatest and closest trading partner is introducing a $850 to $900 billion stimulus package, which has attached to it provisions which will actually discriminate against Canadian companies. And I say to my friends in the New Democratic Party, if you're not prepared to defend that, then in my view you're not prepared to defend the interest of Canadian workers and Canadian businesses, and you're missing the point, and you're missing the boat, and you're missing the point, and you're missing the boat, because it's the New Democratic Party that's the captive of an ideology. The British Labour Party, the French Socialist Party, the German Social Democratic Party, the Swedish Social Democratic Party, the Norwegian Social Democratic Party. Madam Speaker, I say with great respect, it's a movement of which I know something. And I can tell you it's the view, the isolationist, the neo-isolationist view that's taken by the current federal New Democratic Party that is in fact removing it from every single intelligent debate about trade, about globalization, about economic change and economic progress that's taken place over the last 30 years. And listening to the speech from the member from Burnaby, New Westminster, Madam Speaker, I must confess I was taken back, because if anything could be described as a lecture in some abstract political philosophy and political theory, it's the speech we just heard from the member from Burnaby, New Westminster. We face a practical challenge as a country. Our greatest trading partner is about to engage in an act of protectionism. We have an obligation as Canadians, and we have an obligation as members of Parliament to intervene forcefully on behalf of Canadian workers and Canadian businesses in the face of that protectionist spirit. Now, the theory of the United Steelworkers, an organization with which I'm extremely familiar and which I've had close ties over many, many years, of which I'm extremely proud, the dilemma facing the United Steelworkers is they've decided to take a position that says we can defend the interests of American workers as they see it by excluding products from other countries, and we can do it without sideswiping Canada. And all I can say is we'll see whether that happens or not, but I'm not interested in advancing the interests of anyone other than the interests of Canadian workers and Canadian businesses and Canadian economic interests. And if I think that friends of mine who I've worked with over the years are making a mistake, I have no hesitation in saying they're making a mistake. And I'm certainly not here to argue their case. And I'm not here to say I'm arguing their case as if it's the general interest of the people of Canada, because it isn't. There are workers in Sault Ste. Marie who will be laid off as a result of this measure being introduced in the United States. There are workers in Hamilton who will be laid off as a result of this being introduced in the United States. There are workers in Regina at IPCO Steel who will be laid off as a result of this measure. And the member from Burnaby, New Westminster, can engage in all the political philosophy and all the pirouetting that he wants, but he can't ignore the fact that the position being taken today by the New Democratic Party of Canada is contrary to the interests of Canadian working people and of Canadian businesses. And this notion somehow, Mr. Speaker, that what's happened to the Canadian economy and what's happened to the standard of living in North America is a product solely of the North American Free Trade Agreement is preposterous. What has taken place in the world, open up your eyes, look beyond the horizon, see the transformation of India, see the transformation of China, see what the whole process of globalization has meant. Has it produced hardship for many Canadians? Yes, of course it has. Has it resulted in the loss of jobs in the country? Yes, of course it has. But let's not look at trade agreements alone and say it's those trade agreements which are the cause of what's taken place in the country. It's a silly proposition. And I repeat the point, Mr. Speaker, in every single advanced industrial country, the social democratic parties of virtually every one of those countries has recognized that the best way to produce wealth is through markets. This is not the product of ideology. This is the product of experience. Do we need governments? Of course we need governments. Do we need governments to intervene? Of course we do. Governments make up somewhere between 30 and 45, 48% of the GDP of economies across the OECD countries. You can see where we fit in the mix, but we are all mixed economies. But at the basis of that mixed economy have to be strong markets. Are markets getting bigger? Yes. Are they becoming coordinated? Yes. Are they coming together? Yes. Is the world globalizing? Yes. And the sooner the New Democratic Party recognizes that fact, the better off they will be, and frankly, the better off the level of debate and discourse in this House will be.
That's right.
We have to come to terms with the fact, Mr. Speaker, we are members of NAFTA. I fought NAFTA. I didn't like NAFTA, and I'll tell you why I didn't like it. I fought it because I believed at the time the Conservative government was mistaken in thinking that somehow, if we signed that agreement, we would be able to avoid American protectionism. The argument that was made by the Conservative Party at the time and the Prime Minister of the day, the argument that he made was, if we sign this agreement, we will somehow come under an umbrella and we will not be subject to the kind of sideswiping which we've seen. Well, Madam Speaker, I spent 12 years working in the private sector, and for much of that time I was involved in the softwood lumber dispute. My family appreciates the fact that I was so involved because it was a long and arduous negotiation and discussion. But I can tell you, Madam Speaker, the American Congress is not deeply attached to the notion of free trade between Canada and the United States. They like to say that they are. But in fact, every time we have a competitive advantage, every time we have an advantage which gives us access to markets in the United States which is greater than the Americans would like to see, they respond. And the free trade agreement did not and has not protected us against that. It has not had the effect of protecting us against American protectionism. And we have to simply accept that fact and say, okay, there's a level of integration that's taken place under NAFTA. There are issues that we still have, but we have to deal with the world as we find it. I also find it interesting, Mr. Speaker, that the member from Burnaby, New Westminster says, well, any kind of Buy Canada provision that we wanted to put in would be legal. All I can say is that would depend. It would depend on what the provision was. I'm not ideologically opposed to a sensible Buy Canada provision if I think it's going to match what other countries are doing and it's something that we have to do and it's within the framework of our legal structure and of our international obligations. But we are members of WTO. We are a trading country. Our co-ops depend on trade. Our co-ops depend on access to international trade. One of the most ludicrous comments he made was to suggest that somehow the members of the Liberal Party are opposed to the cooperative movement. Tell that to my friend, the former Minister of Agriculture, who's done more to build up co-ops, more to build up supply management, more to build up intervention, more to build up the third sector in Canada. We don't need to take any lessons from the New Democratic Party and how we build up the third sector in this country, but the fact remains, it has to be done in conformity with the law. It has to be done in conformity with our international obligations and with the fact that we are part of a big world, and that world is good for our prosperity, it's good for Canadians, and there's frankly, no other way than for us to be engaged in this world in a positive and constructive way. That's why, Mr. Speaker, I can tell you that in my conversations with American congressmen and with American senators, Madam Speaker, what I am saying time and again, not we understand why you're doing, go ahead and do it, it's good for you, and somehow we'll cope with it all. That's a ridiculous message for a Canadian politician to be delivering to our friends in the United States. The message that I have been delivering is your concern has to be not simply with the prosperity, the short-term prosperity you think you're buying with this measure. Your concern has to be with what this is going to do to the whole pattern of world trade and to the pattern of world investment. Madam Speaker, we are in the middle of a very, very difficult financial crisis, not only in Canada, not only in the United States, but around the world. when the leaders of the G20 got together, Social Democrats, Conservatives, Liberals, representing a variety of political parties and political traditions, what did they all agree on? One of the premises that they all agreed on was that we would not play beggar thy neighbor. We would not try to advance our own short-term interests at the expense of our neighbors. We would not try to bring in a measure that might look as if it was helping workers in Indiana or in Ohio or Pennsylvania or Florida, but in fact won't have that great beneficial effect, and in fact will have a hardening effect on the sense of understanding and the sense of reciprocity, on the sense of expanding commerce and expanding trade that has to be a critical feature of our coming out of this crisis into a greater world of prosperity. Madam Speaker, my colleague from King's Hants has spoken very effectively about what we need to do together as a Parliament to make this change happen. He's spoken very effectively about the need for us to intervene. He's spoken very effectively about the need for us to improve relationships. He's spoken very effectively about how some of the positions taken by the Conservatives in the past have not particularly helped with respect to our developing ties and understanding with members on both sides of the aisle in the United States. And yes, it is going to require us in Canada to up our game and to improve how we are engaged and how we are relating to our friends in the United States. But I particularly want to emphasize, Madam Speaker, the importance of this resolution at this particular moment in our history, at this particular moment in the discussions that are going on in the United States. Let there be no doubt in the United States where Canada stands. Let there be no doubt of the sense in this House as to what our common interest is.
I listened with a great deal of interest to the comments made by the member for Sherbrooke, who made some very significant remarks on the importance of trade, not just for Quebec, but for all of Canada. It's not just a Quebec issue, an Ontario issue, a BC issue. It is something that directly affects all Canadians, all the world, everyone. We have a great deal in common as members of Parliament to look at that protectionism that is there in the United States and say that this is not good for the common prosperity that we all seek, that will not help create more prosperous open markets, and the universe that we wish to create together requires that we respect the principles of social solidarity. We recognize that this is the moment of decision now for this House. It is the time to say with a common voice, that is the common interest of Canada. That is also the interest of our American friends.
To our friends in the United States, we not only have to appeal to their sense of what their international obligations are under the law, we also have to appeal to their sense of common sense and common interest. Madam Speaker, it is not in the interests of the United States to adopt measures which will limit the trade and the commerce and the exchange which needs to exist between our two countries. As my friend from King's Hants has said, a full 40% of the trade that takes place between Canada and the United States takes place within companies. It is a trade. If you look at how a car is produced, there is no such thing as a Canadian car or an American car. The parts from Ohio are moving to Ontario. The cars are being assembled in Ontario. Other parts are being added. This is a fully integrated industry. It's true as well for steel. It's true on so many dimensions and at so many levels. And I say to all members of the House, yes, of course, if the Americans pass this measure, will we have to respond in some way? Of course we will. Should we sit back and say, well, no, we're not going to take it? And no, of course we'll have to respond effectively. But let no one think for a moment, Madam Speaker, that by creating these autarkic economic models in our head, where the picture in their heads in the economy seems to be one where some bright boffin in Ottawa will manage the trade between one country and another and say, you're going to produce over here and you're going to produce over here. Madam Speaker, that ain't the way the world works. It's not the way the world should work. It's not the way the world will work. And the sooner we come to grips with two things: one, what's happening in the world economy and how we have to understand it more deeply and respond more effectively and collectively to what we're facing; and second of all, that the moment of decision is coming in the American Congress, and it's our responsibility to respond effectively and aggressively to those protectionist steps being taken in the Congress. The sooner we come to grips with those two simple facts, not political philosophy, not some abstract economic ideology, but the simple facts of the way things are right now, Madam Speaker, the better off we'll all be. Thank you very much.
Questions and comments.
Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Heritage.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I listened with interest to the member's speech, and of course he made a number of points, one of which was his opposition to NAFTA stemming from concerns about softwood lumber. Of course, he would know that softwood lumber had a special exemption under NAFTA, which is why it needs a separate deal. So I guess he might want to check his notes on that. But that said, I do agree with the member and a lot of the points that he's made. I think that they're important. But under the, I guess I'd go back, I'd reference an old country song that went something like, "I was country when country wasn't cool." This party was actually friends with the Americans when the Liberal Party thought being friends with the Americans wasn't cool, when people like Carolyn Parrish was calling them idiots. You know, I remember the member, for example, from Selkirk Interlake going with the member from Bruce Grey Owen Sound and putting forward the interests of Canadian farmers, Canadian beef farmers. I remember the member from Yellowhead and the member from Edmonton-Leduc meeting with Speaker Nancy Pelosi when she became leader in the Democratic Senate and effectively putting forward our case and saying, we are here, we are partners. And I'll tell you something else. The Americans don't always change the rules when it works for Canada. When Canada was building up manufacturing jobs and increasing our footprint in the auto industry, we were selling those cars into the United States. That was NAFTA working. I agree with the member. We need open trade. We need to make sure protectionist measures don't just creep into the U.S. system, but not creep into any of the major G20 economies. That's why we signed on. Canada is a trading nation. We benefit from that. I encourage the member and I encourage the Liberal Party to keep their current stance. It's the right one. They opposed free trade. They're on the right side now. Keep it up.
The honourable member from Toronto Centre.
I'm sure the honourable member from Peterborough was country before country was cool. I can certainly understand that, why he would say that. But I don't think there's any point in any one of us competing to say who's best friends with who. We are friends with the American people, Madam Speaker, because of the long-standing relationship that we have. We're friends, neighbours, and that relationship is there. We have differences of opinion with them. We have differences of policy with them from time to time. And I'm talking about how we effectively have to advance Canadian interests and how we have to advance those in an effective and sometimes even in quite an aggressive fashion. But there was no special exemption for softwood lumber. This is one of the great mythologies that's been perpetrated over the years. There's never been an exemption for softwood lumber. Never was, never was, never was. The issue on softwood lumber, Madam Speaker, it was an object lesson for me. When we have a competitive advantage in the United States, 50% of the U.S. Senate represents states with less than 20% of the population. In those areas of resources and agriculture, and now we're finding in steel, and now we're finding in manufactured products, and it will only grow. In all those areas, we have a fight on in our hands with respect to American protectionism. And the sooner the members of the Conservative Party and the members of the New Democratic Party and the Bloc can all come to terms with what that means and how we have to take strong action, the better off we'll be, Madam Speaker.
The honourable member from Burnaby, New Westminster.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I listened to with great deal of interest to the member and his speech. It's interesting to note, Mr. Speaker, he seems to be completing his drive to the right because the Conservatives loved his speech. So he may be moving to another party. Who knows? A lot of factual inaccuracies, Madam Speaker, among many other things. We didn't actually say whether we were going to support or oppose this somewhat inaccurate but relatively innocuous motion, and a number of other inaccuracies I won't go into, but he attacked a whole variety of things. He attacked managed trade, which I suppose means that he opposed the Auto Pact. He attacks Buy Canada, so very clearly agrees with his conservative counterparts that we shouldn't take any measures to protect Canadian industries, but he also attacked the steelworkers, Madam Speaker. He said that he disagrees with the steelworkers. Now, you've got Leo Gerard, Ken Newman, two notable steelworker leaders, saying to the Americans and to Canadians, we need to discuss a coordinated approach for the North American industry to strengthen its ability to create and preserve good jobs in both countries. Why is he attacking steelworkers when they're the ones that are impacted and they're the ones that have told him that the NDP approach on a coordinated strategy is right?
Well, member from Toronto Centre.
Madam Speaker, first of all, I don't know whether he's supporting it or opposing it. It sounded to me like he was opposing it. If now he's saying he's not, well, then we'll wait for them to fall off the fence one way or the other. We'll just have to see what they do. I have no idea what they're going to do. It wasn't clear from his speech, obviously. Secondly, I never attacked Buy Canada. What I said was whatever we do has to be compatible with our international obligations. And he said, is it legal or illegal? I said, if it's legal, we'll do it. If it's not legal, we won't do it. It's simple as that. Didn't attack anything. And finally, I never, ever in my comments attacked the steelworkers. I did not do that. In fact, anybody listening would know that I didn't do that. He's the one who's attacking steelworker jobs in Algoma. He's the one who's attacking steelworker jobs in Hamilton. He's the one who's attacking steelworker jobs in Regina. He's the one who's refusing to recognize we are at a moment, Madam Speaker, where the American Congress is about to take steps which is going to be harmful to Canadian steelworkers. And we don't have time for the political theory of wouldn't it be nice if we could work out some new trade pact on steel. We're not going to be able to do that in 5 minutes, but Congress is going to be passing this measure in 5 minutes, and that's why I'm opposing this measure, and I hope and plead with my partners in the New Democratic Party, my friends in the New Democratic Party, because they're still my friends. I'll say to them very clearly, I hope they'll stand up with their fellow parliamentarians and hope they'll stand up for Canadian workers and say no to American protectionism, because it's bad for America and it's certainly bad for Canada, Madam Speaker.
Questions or comments? The honourable member from Edmonton Mill Woods Beaumont.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. And I don't often find myself nodding along with the honourable member when he's speaking. Usually I find myself in a little bit of a contrasting opinion. In this case, I do agree with most of what the honourable member said. I noted that he spent a good deal of his time strongly criticizing the NDP position and particularly the member from Burnaby, New Westminster. But I would note that until very, very recently, the honourable member was the strongest advocate within his party for a coalition agreement with the NDP that would have probably seen the leader of the NDP as the industry minister and may very well have seen the honourable member from Burnaby, New Westminster as the Minister for International Trade. And I'm just wondering if the honourable member could square that circle for us.
The honourable member from Toronto Centre.
The coalition agreement that was negotiated between the former leader of my party and the leaders of the leader of the New Democratic Party did not involve moving away from NAFTA, did not involve moving away from our commitments on international trade, did not involve any steps at all that would have taken us from a sound and positive position for Canada. So I have. At that time, I have no problems in saying what was there was there. What's happened since has happened. All I'm telling the honourable member is, Canada has a moment at which we need to come together as a parliament. In my view, the vote next week should be a unanimous vote. It would be a great thing for this House to be sending as clear as possible a message as we can to the United States with respect to the position that we have. And if I mistook the 20 minutes of diatribe from the honourable member from Burnaby as being a sign that he was in favour of the motion that was proposed by my colleague of King Hants, and somehow I failed to understand the sophistication of his argument and the intricacy of his conclusion, then I accept entirely the criticism. I would be delighted if the New Democratic Party were to support this motion. But it was hard to tell that. I hope members who are sitting here listening to the speech from the member for Burnaby-Coquitlam, a little difficult to tell whether that was really where he was coming from. And I think it's important for us to come together as Canadians, to come together as parliamentarians, and send a very clear message to our friends and colleagues in the United States. Thank you.
questions and comments. There's time for a short question. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of International Trade for 30 seconds.
30 seconds. Madam Speaker, I'll try to be brief. I listened with interest to the honourable member's speech. I think he certainly understands the issue, and he understands the threat that we all face, quite frankly, and I agree with him. If we could get a unanimous decision by this House, it would be excellent. There's one point. I don't think there's any point in going back and looking at who said what or who said or when they said it, which party supports Americans, which ones don't, because I think as a fact, any government in Canada has to have a close relationship with their American partners, regardless of what their political color is.
Honourable member from Toronto Centre has 15 seconds.
Madam Speaker, just on a very personal note, my father was minister in the Canadian Embassy in the 1950s. I was Richard Nixon's newspaper boy. What could be a greater sign of cooperation than for me as a young 9 or 10-year-old to be delivering papers to Richard Nixon? I can assure that my conspiracy theories